He found the bride lashed to a freight wagon, a tag pinned on, "Return to sender." The tag was written in pencil block letters, like whoever wrote it had pressed hard enough to mean it. I didn't read it at first. I saw the rope before I saw the woman, and the rope was what stopped me because I know rope work. Whoever lashed her to that wheel bracket knew knots, not the knots you tie in a hurry, the kind you tie when you want something to hold. The wagon was Delbert Prute's freight rig, pulled off the South Road about a quarter-mile past the Harmon Creek Bridge. One of his mules had thrown a shoe, and they'd unhitched and gone on foot to find a farrier, or so I figured later. Left the wagon sitting there in the yellow grass with that woman tied to the wheel in the afternoon heat, her wrists bound out in front like she was offering something. Dressed the color of old bone, no hat. The sun had been on her for a while. I was moving a load of window glass to the Catcher Settlement, 8 crates. Took me 4 hours to pack them in sawdust, and I drove slow as a man can drive. I had no reason to pull over. The wagon wasn't blocking the road. The woman hadn't called out. I saw her head come up when I drew even with her, and she looked straight at me, and that was the thing. Most people in a bad situation look away or look down. She looked straight at me. I set the brake and climbed down. She said, "Don't make a fuss about it." I said I wasn't planning to fuss. I pulled my knife and cut the rope at her wrists, then the longer piece that ran from her waist to the wheel spoke. Her hands were swollen some. She worked her fingers open and closed without looking at them. That's when I read the tag. It was pinned to the front of her dress through the cloth, a proper safety pin. The tag was cut from a flour sack, and on it in those same block letters, "Return to sender." I took the tag off and put it in my vest pocket without saying anything about it. Her name was Cora Vasquez. She told me that before she told me anything else, like she wanted to get the record straight. Not Cora, whatever his name was. Cora Vasquez. Her father had been a vaquero out of Sonora, her mother a Kansas woman who'd come west on one of the early trains, and she'd grown up between 2 languages and 2 worlds and comfortable in neither. She'd answered a letter from a man in the Bitterroot country. He described himself as a rancher with good prospects and a decent house and a need for a steady partner who could work. She'd written back 3 times. He'd written back twice. She'd packed what she owned into a trunk the size of a steamer chest and ridden north. She got through the whole of it sitting on the wagon's tongue, her feet in the dry grass, rubbing her wrists. Flat voice, not performing anything. The man had taken one look at her at the stage stop and said she wasn't what he'd expected. She asked what that meant. He said it meant what it meant. There were 2 of his ranch hands with him, and they'd laughed, and he'd paid a freight hauler to take her back the way she came, and he'd written the tag himself. She'd watched him do it and pinned it on her himself while one of the hands held her arms. That's the part she said flattest. Like she'd decided somewhere in the long, hot afternoon that she was not going to let it matter as much as it wanted to. I didn't say anything for a while. Then I said she could ride with me as far as I was going, which was the Catcher Settlement, 4 hours east, and from there she could get herself wherever she needed to get. She looked at the 8 crates in the wagon bed and said, "That glass." I said it was. She said she'd ride in front then, not in back, so she wouldn't be worrying about the glass the whole time. I said that was fine. My name is Earl Cutter. I have been hauling freight on the high plains and the mountain passes north of it for going on 31 years. I started when I was young and I continued when I was not. The work suited me because it required more than people thought it required and paid less than it should have, which meant the men who stayed at it tended to be men who stayed at things. I never married. I came close twice, and the second time not very close. I owned a mule named August, and a horse named Vera, and a Studebaker wagon that I had rebuilt from the frame up and knew the way. A man knows the house he grew up in, every squeak and lean and tendency. I was 63 years old the afternoon I cut Cora Vasquez off that wheel. I don't tell you that to set up something. I tell you because it's the truth and because the truth has weight, and a story without its weight is just noise. She rode beside me, and we didn't talk much for the first hour. The road ran east through a long corridor of cottonwoods along the creek, then opened out into table land, short grass going gold in the late light, the mountains behind us shrinking. I watched the road. She watched everything else, the hawks working the updraft, a far-off homestead with its single window catching the sun, a herd of antelope maybe 2 miles north moving like brown water across the grass. She asked me what the glass was for. I told her about the Catcher settlement, 7 families who'd come in from Ohio and Indiana over the past 3 years, building up a little town from nothing. They'd just finished framing a schoolhouse, and they'd ordered glass for the windows. Children's schoolhouse out on the open plain, and they'd ordered glass for the windows before they'd ordered half the other things a building needs. I told her that because it told you something about those people. She said it does. I said, what does it tell you? She said that they think there's going to be more children. After the second hour she slept. I don't know how, on a freight wagon with the road rough as it was, but she tipped her head back against the seat board and went away somewhere. I drove and let her sleep. Her hands were in her lap, and the swelling had mostly gone down, and the rope marks on her wrists were going purple. I had been thinking, the way you think when you're driving and your hands are busy and your mind is loose. I've been thinking about the man in the Bitterroot country who'd written the tag. Block letters pressed hard. I put it in my vest pocket and it was still there, and I wasn't sure why I'd kept it instead of dropping it in the grass. Maybe because it was evidence of something. I wasn't sure of what yet. When she woke up she said, I don't have money to pay you. I said I didn't ask for money. She said she knew that. She was telling me she didn't have it, so I knew where things stood. I said where things stood was fine. She looked at me then. Not the way she'd looked at me from the wheel, which had been assessment, sizing up a situation the way a careful person does. This was different, like she was adding something up and couldn't quite get the column to close. She said, where are you going after you deliver the glass? I told her I had a run coming up in 2 weeks, cedar posts from the Hendricks Mill down to Fort Laramie, but between that I'd be at my place. I had a small house on the west side of the Catcher settlement, 2 rooms, good well, a shed for the animals. She said, is there work there, in the settlement? I said they were always needing someone who could sew, cook, help with the school. The woman who'd been running the lending library out of her front room had just had twins and was underwater. She nodded. She was thinking, and I could see it happening, and I didn't interrupt it. The Catcher settlement was lamplit by the time we rolled in, maybe 7 in the evening, and the whole Catcher family came out when they heard the wagon Ned Catcher, who was the closest thing the settlement had to a mayor, his wife Alma, and 3 of their 5 children who were still young enough to run. There were 2 other men who came out to help unload, Bauer and a man named Sills who'd been a joiner back in Indiana and who'd framed the schoolhouse almost single-handed. They noticed Cora. They didn't say anything about it, not directly, which is how the Catcher people were. But Alma Catcher was looking at the rope marks on Cora's wrists and then at me, and I saw the look and I gave her the smallest shake of my head, meaning, not now. We unloaded the glass. Sills and I carried each crate and Bauer steadied, and Cora held the lantern without being asked. She'd picked it up off the wagon seat and just stood where the light was useful and moved when we needed her to move and didn't make a thing of it. Afterward Alma fed us. Salt pork and boiled potatoes and cornbread and coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe. Cora ate like she hadn't eaten since the morning, which was probably true. Nobody asked her anything. Ned Catcher talked about the schoolhouse and the windows and when school might start and whether they could get a teacher to come out this far. Sills talked about a horse he was thinking of buying. Normal talk. The kind that says, you're at a table, you're fed, you're among people, that's enough for right now. After supper, Alma took Cora to wash up and to sleep in the spare room where the Catcher daughters slept when there was company. Ned Catcher and I sat on his porch. He had a pipe and I had tobacco, but no pipe, and he gave me a spare one he kept hung by the door. He said she come with you. I said she came with me as far as here. After that was her business. He said, where'd you find her? I took the tag out of my vest pocket and handed it to him. He read it and handed it back. He said, Bitterroot Country, that's Hargrove, got a spread up near Derby. I said I didn't know the man. Ned said I do, a little. He's been down this way twice. Once for timber rights, once for I don't remember what. He's got money and he knows he has it. I put the tag back in my pocket. Ned smoked. The settlement was quiet. There was a dog barking somewhere to the north, then not barking. He said, you thinking of going back up there? I said I hadn't decided. He said, I said what? He said nothing, just I said I was going to sleep in the wagon and pull out in the morning. He said the spare shed was open if I wanted it. In the morning Cora was up before I was. I know because when I came out to see to August and Vera I found her in the shed, already done feeding them both, forking the last of the fresh hay into August's side. She'd found the hay without being told where it was. I said you didn't have to. She said she'd been awake anyway. I watered them and hitched Vera to the wagon and left August on the line. Cora watched me work. She had color in her face this morning that she hadn't had yesterday. She'd washed her hair and it was pinned up differently. She said, I'll stay here a while. Alma needs help with the little ones, and she said she'd pay me in room and board until I figure out what's next. I said that was good. She said, where's that tag? I reached in my vest and gave it to her. She looked at it for a moment. Then she folded it once small and put it in her own pocket. She said, I'll keep that. I said, all right. She said, are you going back up there? I said I didn't know yet. She said, I'm not asking you to. I want you to know that. I'm not asking for anything. I said I knew she wasn't. She looked at me the way she'd looked at me the evening before, the adding up look, the column that wouldn't close. She said, you're a strange man, Earl Cutter. I said most people didn't find me strange, they found me dull. She said, those people weren't paying attention. I climbed up to the seat. August looked at me from the line like I was abandoning him personally. I told him I'd be back in a week. I was back in 4 days. The reason was simple enough, or simple in the telling anyway. I'd gone 40 miles south on a retrieval job, a wagon load of damaged goods from a trading post that had taken on water in the spring flood, and somewhere around the second day, I'd found myself thinking about block letters pressed hard into a flour sack tag. Not with anger, exactly. Anger wasn't quite the word. It was something older than anger, something that lived lower down. The kind of feeling that doesn't have a name because you're not supposed to admit you have it. I knew who Hargrove was now. Ned had told me enough, and I'd filled in the rest from men I ran into at the trading post who knew the Bitterroot Country. He was the kind of man who buys things and expects them to be what he paid for. Livestock, timber rights, a wife who looked a certain way. When the goods didn't meet the expectation, he sent them back. That was the whole of it. That was the extent of his thinking. And Cora Vasquez had sat in that heat with those rope marks, and that tag, and she'd looked straight at me. Not at anyone else on that road, at me. I turned north 2 days earlier than I'd planned, and came back to the Catcher settlement in the afternoon of the 4th day. She was behind Alma's house hanging laundry, a long line of it in the wind, sheets and work shirts moving. She saw me drive up and she didn't come over right away. She finished pinning the sheet she was pinning. Then she walked over and leaned on the side of the wagon. She said 4 days. I said I'd come back early. She said, I see that. I said, I need to go up to the Bitterroot Country. She said, I told you I wasn't asking you to do that. I said I knew. I said it wasn't for her exactly, or it wasn't only for her. She looked at me. I said there were things a man ought to say to another man when they need saying, and I hadn't said them yet, and it was sitting on me. She was quiet for a moment. She said, "What do you want me to do?" I said I wanted her to stay put until I got back. She said, "That's all." I said that was all. She looked down at the wagon wheel. August was watching her from the trace. She reached out and patted August's nose, and he let her. She said, "He likes you. He doesn't let just anyone do that." She said, "How long?" I said 8 days, maybe 10. There and back plus however long the conversation took. She said, "All right. But I want you to understand something, Earl. I'm not waiting on you. I'm staying because I have work here and because Alma needs me and because the settlement's not a bad place to be. You understand the difference." I said I did. She said, "Good, then go. I won't tell you the whole of what happened in the Bitterroot country. Some of it belongs only there. I will tell you that Hargrove had a big house and a foreman who looked at me the way a dog looks at something it's already decided to bite. I will tell you that I asked to speak to Hargrove, and they made me wait in the yard for a while before he came out. I will tell you he was a large man, prosperous, with the kind of face that's never much had to explain itself. I told him who I was. I told him what I'd found on the South Road. I told him I'd kept the tag and what I intended to do with it, which was put it in the county clerk's office with a written account, filed, so there was a record. He looked at me. He was trying to decide if I mattered. I said, "The woman was a person who answered your letter in good faith and traveled a long way and got herself tied to a wagon wheel." I said, "You want to tell yourself that's nothing, that's your affair. But I'm going to make sure there's a piece of paper somewhere that says it happened." He started talking then. The way men like that talk when they realize something isn't going to go the way they want, loud at first, then explanatory, then quieter. He said she wasn't what he'd expected. He said the arrangement hadn't suited. He said he'd made sure she had transportation. I let him finish. I said she had rope marks on her wrists. That's what you made sure she had. He said I had no business up here and I ought to move on. I said I was moving on. I said I'd said what I came to say and I meant to keep my word about the county clerk. I didn't raise my voice the whole time. I didn't make threats. I said what needed saying in the plainest words I had. His foreman followed me to the gate. He said something I won't repeat here because it was the kind of thing that doesn't bear repeating. I got on the wagon and I drove. On the way south I stopped at the county seat and I filed the account. The clerk was a small man with ink-stained fingers who read what I'd written without expression and then looked at me over his spectacles. He said, "You know this man Hargrove?" I said I just met him. He said he's got friends here. I said I expected he did. He said this may not go anywhere. I said it was filed. Whether it went anywhere was other people's business. Mine was just to file it. He stamped it and I left. I was back at the Catcher settlement on the 9th day. Cora was in the library room at the front of the Harmon house. They'd moved the library there from wherever it had been, organized the shelves, put out a chalkboard with the hours written on it. She was helping a boy of maybe 10 find something, showing him along the shelf with one finger. She glanced up when I came in. She finished with the boy first. She found him his book and sent him out. Then she came and stood in front of me. She looked me over the way you look at something you've sent out into rough weather and want to make sure came back whole. She said, "You're not hurt." I said I wasn't. She said, "Did you say what you want to say?" I said I did. She said, "And?" I said it was filed, that's what it was. She nodded. She wasn't surprised. She hadn't expected more than that and she hadn't expected less. That was the thing about Cora Vasquez. She understood exactly what the world gave and what it withheld, and she didn't punish you for the difference. She said, "Are you hungry?" I said I could eat. She brought me into the back room where Alma had a pot going, and she sat across from me at the table while I ate. She didn't talk much. She'd refilled my coffee before it was empty without my asking. After a while she said, "I've been thinking." I said, "About what?" She said, "About whether there's work on a freight line for someone who can keep accounts and speak 2 languages and handle a mule team." I set down my fork. I said, "You can handle a mule team." She said her father had put her up on a mule before she could walk, more or less. I said August was particular. She said, "August liked me fine, and I think you know that." I didn't say anything for a moment. I was looking at the table. There was a burn mark on it, old from a lamp or a coal, the shape of it like a bent finger. I said it's hard work, and the pay's not what it should be. She said she'd heard that somewhere. I said the house has 2 rooms and 1 fireplace, and in the winter it's cold enough to make you reconsider your choices. She said she'd lived in colder. I said, "I don't know what else to tell you about it." She said, "You don't have to tell me anything else about it." She was looking at me directly, the way she'd first looked at me from the wagon wheel. Not with need, not with gratitude, with something straighter than either. Like she had looked at all of it, the 2 rooms, the hard pay, the cold winters, and the 63-year-old man sitting in front of her, and had done her arithmetic, and the sum suited her. I said, "All right then." She reached across the table and put her hand on top of mine, just for a moment. It was a plain thing, warm and unhurried. The hand of a woman who'd made up her mind. She said, "Good." That was 9 years ago. August died the winter after. Vera is still going, old now but steady. I bought a second mule and Cora named her Petra, and Petra turned out to have opinions about everything, which suited her owner. Cora runs the accounts. She speaks to the Mexican families who have come into the settlement in the past few years, and to the Basque shepherds who winter south of us. And there are contracts I'd never have gotten without her, because people trust a handshake more when there's someone there who speaks to them in their own tongue. The library moved to the new building 2 years ago. Proper shelves, 2 windows with the good glass. They named the collection room after nobody, which was Cora's idea. She said it ought to be for whoever needed it, not for whoever funded it. The county clerk's report on Hargrove didn't go anywhere, as the man predicted. But I've heard from 3 different sources in the past 9 years that Hargrove's operation has gone lean, and his foreman left, and the big house needs a new roof. I don't know if any of that is connected to anything. Maybe it's just the way things go. The tag is in Cora's dresser drawer, still folded. I've seen her take it out sometimes and look at it. Not often. She doesn't make a ritual of it. I think it's just a reminder of something she decided to keep owning rather than let someone else own for her. Some evenings we sit on the porch and the light comes level across the grass, and the mountains are dark blue in the distance, and August is buried under the big cottonwood out by the well. Cora will have her coffee and I'll have mine, and we don't always talk. There's no need to always talk. The quiet between people who have decided on each other is a different kind of quiet than any other kind there is. I learned that late. Some things you do learn late. She chose this. That's the part I come back to, the part that still settles in me when I let myself think about it. She'd been tied to a wheel and tagged and left in the heat, and she'd looked at me, a freight hauler, 63, 2 rooms, cold winters, and she'd done her arithmetic and the sum suited her. The morning light is coming in off the grass now. I can hear her in the kitchen, the sound of the iron skillet on the grate. In a little while I'll go in. That's enough, that's more than enough, that's the whole of it right there.